1895, Horseshoe Bend, Louisiana, at the river ferry crossing where the bayou met the territorial road. Ellen Donovan stood on the landing dock with a ledger in her hands and murder on her mind. Her father had been dead 3 weeks. The ferry was hers now, and the man who killed him wore a Marshal's badge. She was 28, alone, and holding evidence that could hang him if she lived long enough to use it. The early summer heat shimmered over the slow brown water, and a cottonmouth slid off a cypress knee into the current without a sound. Ellen wiped sweat from her temple and watched the far bank where the trees grew thick and the road vanished into shadow. Someone was coming. She could feel it the way she felt storms before the sky turned. The ferry rocked gently under her boots, and she turned as hoofbeats thudded soft on the dirt road. A lone rider came out of the trees, his hat low, his horse moving at an easy walk. Ellen set the ledger down on the dock railing and reached for the iron handle of the ferry winch, then stopped. The rider was close enough now she could see the badge. Deputy Thomas Harrison reined in at the water's edge and tipped his hat back, and his blue eyes found hers across 20 feet of sluggish current.
"Miss Donovan, I need passage."
His voice was low and careful, like a man talking to a spooked horse. Ellen studied him. She had seen him in town twice since her father died, always watching, never speaking. He was young for a deputy, maybe 30, with the kind of face that had seen too much and decided not to talk about it. His gun sat in its holster untouched, and his hands rested easy on the saddle horn.
"You working for Marshal Kane?"
Thomas shook his head slow.
"Not anymore. I quit this morning."
"Why?"
"Because he is what you think he is, and I am not going to help him anymore."
Ellen felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the wall she had built since the funeral. She cranked the winch, and the ferry began its slow journey across the water, the ropes groaning under the weight. Thomas rode his horse onto the platform and dismounted, leading the animal to the center where the boards were strongest. The ferry swayed, and Ellen balanced without thinking, her body used to the rhythm. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He moved like a man who had made a choice and was still deciding if it was the right one. The water slid past, thick and quiet, and a heron lifted off a log downstream with a lazy flap of wings.
"Your father was a good man. I am sorry."
"Sorry does not tell me who killed him."
"I know who killed him. So do you."
Ellen turned and met his gaze straight on.
"Then why are you here instead of arresting him?"
"Because I cannot prove it, and because he has 6 men who will swear he was somewhere else."
The ferry bumped against the far dock, and Ellen set the brake. Thomas led his horse off and stood waiting while she secured the ropes. The sun was climbing higher now, the heat pressing down like a hand, and the air smelled of mud and wild jasmine. Ellen wiped her hands on her skirt and walked past him toward the small cabin her father had built on the rise above the landing.
"Then what do you want from me?"
"I want to know what you have that scares him."
Ellen stopped walking. She did not turn around.
"Who says I have anything?"
"He does. Every time someone mentions your name, he gets a look, like a man who stepped on a snake and has not been bit yet."
Ellen turned slowly. Thomas stood in the shade of a live oak, his hat in his hands now, his expression open and tired.
"If I show you, and you are lying, I am dead."
"If I wanted you dead, I would have stayed on his payroll."
The logic was simple and true. Ellen studied him another long moment, then nodded once.
Follow me.
She led him up the path to the cabin, a single-room structure with a porch and a good roof. Inside it was dim and cool, the shutters half closed against the heat. Ellen went to the old desk in the corner and pulled out a small wooden box. She opened it and took out a silver locket on a thin chain.
My father found this in the Marshal's saddlebag the night before he died. He was fixing a strap, and it fell out. He opened it.
She pressed the catch, and the locket opened. Inside was a photograph, small and faded, of a young woman with dark hair and a baby in her arms. On the back, in careful script, were 2 names and a date. Thomas took the locket and read the inscription, and his face went still.
This is Judge Mercer's wife and his son. They died in a fire 2 years ago.
The Marshal said it was an accident.
It was not. The judge was about to open an investigation into land fraud. Half the deeds in this parish are forged. Kane was part of it. The judge disappeared 3 weeks ago. Everyone thinks he ran.
But if the Marshal had this locket, he was there. He took it from her before she died.
Or after.
The words hung in the air like smoke. Ellen took the locket back and closed it, the tiny click loud in the quiet room.
My father was going to bring this to the territorial governor. The Marshal found out.
How?
I do not know. But 2 days later, my father was dead. They said his horse threw him. But my father rode for 40 years and never came off a horse in his life.
Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he put his hat back on and looked at her with something that might have been respect.
You cannot trust the sheriff. You cannot trust the judge if they ever send a new one. And you cannot go to the governor without dying on the road.
I know.
So what are you going to do?
I am going to wait until he makes a mistake. And then I am going to put a bullet in him myself, if I have to.
Thomas shook his head.
No. You are not.
You do not get to tell me what I can and cannot do.
I am not telling you. I am asking you to let me help. I will not draw my gun unless I have to. But I will stand between you and him until this is finished.
Ellen stared at him. She did not know if he was brave or foolish, or both. But she knew she was alone, and he was offering something she had not had since her father died. An ally. She nodded once. Slow.
All right. But if you cross me, I will know.
You will.
A sound from outside made them both turn. Boots on the porch, heavy and deliberate. Ellen slipped the locket into her pocket and moved to the window. A man stood at the door, broad-shouldered and smiling, his leather apron dusty from the forge. Victor Thornton, the blacksmith. He knocked, 2 sharp raps, and called out cheerful. The blacksmith said he had come to check on her, to see if the ferry needed any ironwork done, his voice smooth and concerned. Ellen opened the door a crack and told him everything was fine, her tone polite and cool. Victor's smile did not waver, but his eyes flicked past her to where Thomas stood in the shadows. The blacksmith said he was glad to see she had company, that a woman alone was not safe, especially these days. Then he tipped his hat and left, his boots heavy on the porch steps. Ellen closed the door and locked it.
He is watching me.
He has been watching you for months. Everyone knows it.
He is the one setting the fires.
Thomas frowned.
What fires?
3 barns in the last 2 weeks, all of them owned by people my father trusted. The Marshal is blaming drifters, but there are no drifters. Victor is doing it. I saw him near the Calloway place the night before it burned.
Why?
Because he wants me. And he thinks if he destroys everyone around me, I will have no choice but to turn to him.
Thomas was silent. Then, he stepped to the window and looked out at the road, where Victor was disappearing into the trees.
If he is working with the Marshal, they will come for you soon. If he is working alone, he will do something desperate before the first snow. Either way, you are not safe here.
This is my home. I am not leaving.
Then, I am staying.
No. If you stay, people will talk. It will make things worse.
Let them talk. I am not leaving you alone.
Ellen wanted to argue, but the truth was, she was afraid. Not of dying, but of dying alone with the evidence still hidden, and her father's murder unavenged. She looked at Thomas and saw the same stubbornness in his face that she felt in her own chest.
All right. But you sleep in the barn.
Fair enough.
That night, Ellen lay in her narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the bayou, the frogs and the night birds, and the soft creak of the ferry ropes. She could see the barn from her window, a dark shape against the stars. And she knew Thomas was in there with his horse and his gun and his promise. She did not know if she trusted him yet, but she wanted to. The locket was under her pillow, cold and small, and she closed her hand around it and thought of her father and the judge's wife and the baby who had burned. She did not sleep until the sky started to turn gray. The next morning, Ellen woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright and ran to the window. The barn was fine, but a thin column of black smoke rose from the trees half a mile downriver. She dressed fast and ran outside. Thomas was already saddled, his face grim.
The old Morrow place. It is burning.
There is no one there. It has been empty for a year.
That is the point. He is sending a message.
They rode together, Ellen on her father's old mare, Thomas on his bay gelding. The fire was still small when they reached it, confined to the porch and the front wall, but it was spreading fast in the dry wood. Thomas dismounted and ran for the well, hauling up buckets while Ellen beat at the flames with a wet sack. The heat was brutal, and the smoke stung her eyes. But they worked without speaking, side by side, until the fire was out. Ellen sat down hard on the ground, her face streaked with soot, her hands blistered. Thomas knelt beside her and handed her a canteen.
He was here. I can smell kerosene.
Why here? No one cares about this place.
Because it is close to your ferry. He wants you to know he can reach you whenever he wants.
Ellen drank from the canteen and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand.
Then we need to stop waiting. We need to make him come to us.
How?
I will let it be known I am taking the locket to the governor, that I am leaving tomorrow at dawn. He will have to move tonight.
That is a bad plan.
It is the only plan.
If he comes, he will not come alone.
I know.
And you think the two of us can stand against him and his men?
No. I think you can. I will be bait.
Thomas stood and paced, his hands clenched.
I told you, I will not draw my gun again, unless you are threatened. If you do this, you will be threatened, and I will have to break that promise.
Then, break it.
He turned and looked at her, his blue eyes dark.
You do not know what you are asking.
I know exactly what I am asking. I am asking you to choose. Me or your conscience.
That is not fair.
Nothing about this is fair. My father is dead. The judge is dead. His wife and child are dead. And the man who did it is still wearing a badge. So yes, I am asking you to choose.
Thomas stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Slow and final.
All right. We do it your way. But you do exactly what I tell you. No arguments.
Agreed.
They rowed back to the ferry in silence. Ellen went into town that afternoon and made sure to tell the storekeeper, loud enough for others to hear, that she was taking important documents to the capital and leaving at first light. By sunset, the whole settlement knew. Ellen packed a bag and set it by the door, then sat on the porch with her rifle across her knees and waited. Thomas was in the barn, out of sight, but she knew he was watching. The sun went down in a blaze of red and gold, and the bayou turned to shadow. The frogs started singing, and the air cooled just enough to breathe. Ellen heard the horses before she saw them. 4 riders coming slow up the road, their faces hidden in the dusk. She stood and cocked the rifle, the sound sharp in the quiet. The riders stopped at the edge of the clearing. One of them moved his horse forward, and Ellen recognized the marshal's gray. Marshal Kane sat easy in the saddle, his badge glinting in the last of the light. The marshal called out, his voice smooth, asking if she was planning a trip. Ellen said it was none of his business. The marshal laughed and said everything in this parish was his business, especially when it involved his good name. Ellen told him to leave. The marshal shook his head and said he could not do that, not when she was carrying something that did not belong to her.
I do not know what you are talking about.
The marshal dismounted, and the other 3 men did the same. They spread out, slow and deliberate, and Ellen felt her heart begin to pound.
You are on my property. Get off, or I will shoot.
The marshal smiled. The marshal said she would not shoot, that she was her father's daughter, and her father never had the stomach for killing. Ellen raised the rifle and aimed at his chest.
Try me.
The marshal took a step forward, and Ellen pulled the trigger. The shot cracked loud, and the marshal stumbled back, clutching his arm. The other men drew their guns, and Ellen dove off the porch as bullets splintered the wood where she had been standing. She rolled and came up running, heading for the trees, her breath ragged. Behind her she heard shouting and more shots, and then a different sound, closer and sharper. Thomas. He came out of the barn with his gun drawn, and the first man went down before he even turned. The second man fired wild, and Thomas shot him in the leg, dropping him hard. The third man ran for his horse, and Thomas let him go. The marshal was on the ground, bleeding, but alive, his good hand reaching for his gun. Thomas walked over and kicked it away, then stood over him with his revolver steady.
It is over, Kane.
The marshal spat blood and laughed. The marshal said it was not over, that he had friends, that Thomas would hang for this. Thomas shook his head.
No. You will.
Ellen came out of the trees, her rifle still in her hands, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She looked at Thomas, and he looked back, and something passed between them that did not need words.
We need to tie them up and get the sheriff.
The sheriff is one of his friends.
Then, we take them to the capital ourselves.
That is 3 days' ride. They will have help before we get halfway.
Ellen thought fast. Then she remembered.
The territorial judge. The new one. He is supposed to arrive next week. We can hold them until then.
Where?
The old ice house. No one uses it anymore. It has a good lock.
Thomas nodded. They worked quickly, binding the marshal and the 2 wounded men and loading them onto their horses. The 3rd man was long gone, but Ellen did not care. They had the marshal, and that was enough. They rode through the night, the prisoners tied and silent, and reached the ice house just before dawn. It was a squat stone building half buried in the hillside, cool and dark inside. They locked the men in, and Thomas stood guard while Ellen rode back to the ferry for supplies. The sun was coming up when she returned, the sky pale and clear, and she found Thomas sitting on the steps of the ice house with his gun across his knees and exhaustion written all over his face. She sat down beside him and handed him a canteen.
Thank you.
For what?
For keeping your promise.
I broke it. I drew my gun.
Only because I was threatened. Just like you said.
Thomas drank from the canteen and wiped his mouth.
I am not proud of it.
You should be. You saved my life.
You saved mine first. If you had not pulled that trigger, we would both be dead.
Ellen looked at him. Really looked at him. And saw a man who had spent his whole life trying to do the right thing and hating himself every time it cost him something. She reached over and took his hand, and he did not pull away.
We make a good team.
We do.
They stayed at the ice house for 6 days, taking turns on watch, sleeping in shifts, eating cold food, and waiting. On the 7th day, a rider came up the road carrying a satchel and wearing a suit. He introduced himself as Judge Whitman, newly appointed, and asked why he had received an urgent message to come to an ice house in the middle of nowhere. Ellen handed him the locket and told him everything. The judge listened without interrupting, his face grave. When she finished, he opened the locket and studied the photograph for a long time. Then, he looked at Thomas. The judge asked if he could corroborate her story. Thomas said he could, and that he had been a deputy under Marshal Kane until he learned the truth. The judge nodded and asked to see the prisoners. Thomas unlocked the door, and the marshal stumbled out into the light, blinking and filthy and furious. The marshal started to speak, but the judge held up a hand. The judge said he had heard enough, that the locket alone was evidence of murder, and that there would be a trial in the capital as soon as they could arrange transport. The marshal tried to argue, but the judge ignored him and turned to Ellen. The judge thanked her for her courage and said her father would have been proud. Ellen felt tears prick her eyes, but she did not let them fall. The judge left with the prisoners and a pair of armed escorts he had brought, and Ellen and Thomas stood in the road and watched them go. When the dust settled, Ellen turned to Thomas.
What will you do now?
I do not know. I am not a deputy anymore. I do not have a job.
You could stay. The ferry needs help. And I could use a partner.
Thomas looked at her, and a slow smile spread across his face.
A partner?
If you want.
I want.
Ellen smiled back, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than fear and anger. She felt hope. They rowed back to the ferry together, and the bayou was quiet and green and full of life. That evening, Ellen stood on the dock and watched the sun go down, the sky turning pink and orange and purple. And Thomas stood beside her with his hand in hers.
There is one more thing.
What?
Victor. He is still out there.
I know.
He will come back.
Let him.
Ellen looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster.
I am not going anywhere, and neither are you.
The next morning, Ellen woke to the sound of hammering. She pulled on her dress and went outside to find Thomas on the barn roof, replacing shingles. He looked down and grinned.
Figured I should earn my keep.
You already did.
Then, I am getting ahead.
Ellen laughed, and it felt good, like breathing after holding her breath too long. She went to the cabin and made coffee, and they sat on the porch and drank it while the bayou woke up around them. The ferry rocked gently at the dock, and a pair of egrets waded in the shallows, white against the brown water.
Do you think the judge will convict him?
I do. The locket is proof. And there are other people who will talk now that he is locked up.
Good.
They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then, Ellen set down her cup and looked at him.
Can I ask you something?
Anything.
Why did you really quit?
Because I could not stand watching him destroy people and pretending I did not know. And because I saw you at your father's funeral, and I thought if someone that strong could stand up to him, maybe I could too.
Ellen felt her throat tighten.
I am not that strong.
Yes, you are.
Ellen reached over and took his hand again. And this time, she did not let go. They spent the day working together, repairing the ferry ropes and patching the cabin roof and clearing brush from the landing. It was hard work, but it felt good, purposeful. And Ellen found herself laughing more than she had in months. Thomas had a quiet sense of humor, dry and unexpected, and he made her feel like she was not carrying the weight of the world alone anymore. That night, they ate supper on the porch. Beans and cornbread and blackberries Ellen had picked that morning. The stars came out thick and bright, and the bayou hummed with night sounds.
I have been thinking.
About what?
About what happens next. When the trial is over and people stop talking.
What do you want to happen?
I want this. The ferry. A life. Someone to share it with.
You have that.
Do I?
Thomas set down his plate and turned to face her.
Ellen, I am not good with words, but I know what I feel. And I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to find someone like you. Someone who does not run. Someone who stands and fights.
I ran once. When my father died, I wanted to leave. I wanted to sell the ferry and disappear.
But you did not.
No. I did not.
That is what matters.
Ellen looked at him, and the fear that had lived in her chest since the funeral started to ease.
What are you saying?
I am saying I want to stay. Not just for the ferry. For you. If you will have me.
Ellen felt tears sting her eyes. But this time, she let them come.
I will have you.
Thomas smiled, and it was the kind of smile that changed his whole face, made him look younger and lighter and free. He leaned over and kissed her, slow and careful, and Ellen kissed him back with everything she had. When they pulled apart, She was crying and laughing at the same time, and he wiped her tears away with his thumb.
We should probably talk about practical things,
Like what?
like where I sleep.
You can sleep in the cabin. We can figure the rest out as we go.
That sounds good.
The next 3 weeks passed in a kind of dream. Ellen and Thomas worked the ferry together, and people started to notice. Some of them talked, but most of them just smiled and nodded and paid their crossing fee without comment. The blacksmith did not come back, and Ellen started to relax. Just a little. Then one night she woke to the smell of smoke again. She sat up fast, her heart pounding, and looked out the window. The barn was on fire. She screamed for Thomas, and he was up and running before she finished his name. They both ran outside, and Ellen saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, broad-shouldered and familiar. Victor. He stood, watching the flames, his face lit by the firelight, and when he saw Ellen, he smiled. Victor called out, his voice calm, saying he had waited long enough, that she would come to him now, or she would lose everything. Ellen grabbed her rifle from the porch, but Thomas was already moving. He sprinted toward Victor, and the blacksmith turned and ran, heading for the trees. Thomas did not draw his gun. He just ran, faster than Ellen had ever seen anyone run, and he caught Victor at the tree line, tackling him to the ground. They fought hard, rolling in the dirt, and Ellen ran toward them with the rifle raised. Victor was stronger, but Thomas was faster and angrier, and he got the blacksmith pinned face down in the dirt with his knee in his back.
Ellen, get rope.
Ellen ran to the barn, which was still burning but not fully engulfed, and grabbed a coil of rope from just inside the door. She could feel the heat on her face, could hear the wood cracking and popping. She ran back and handed Thomas the rope, and he tied Victor's wrists behind his back, tight and secure. Victor was cursing and spitting, saying things that made Ellen's skin crawl, but Thomas just pulled the knots tighter and hauled him to his feet.
We are taking him to the Marshal in the morning. Tonight, he stays tied to that tree.
Thomas marched Victor to a thick oak at the edge of the clearing and tied him there, wrapping the rope around the trunk multiple times. Victor shouted that the Marshal would not believe them, that he had friends, that Ellen would regret this. Ellen ignored him and turned to the barn. The fire was spreading, and she knew they could not save it. Thomas came to stand beside her, and together they watched it burn.
We lost the barn.
We will rebuild.
It will take months.
Then it takes months. We do it together.
Ellen nodded, and she leaned into him, and they stood there until the fire died down to coals. Victor eventually stopped shouting and just sat there, tied to the tree, sullen and silent. In the morning, Thomas loaded him onto a horse and rode into town with Ellen following on her own mount. They went straight to the Marshal's office, and Ellen handed over the locket and the photograph and told the whole story. The Marshal was a hard-faced man with silver hair and cold eyes, and he listened without interrupting. When Ellen finished, he looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at Victor. The Marshal said he had suspected Victor for a while, that there had been other fires, other accidents, but no proof until now. He thanked Ellen and Thomas, and he locked Victor in a cell. Victor screamed that he would get out, that he would come back, that Ellen would pay. The Marshal told him to shut up, and Victor did. Ellen and Thomas rode back to the ranch in silence, both of them exhausted and covered in soot. When they got home, Ellen went to the remains of the barn and stood there looking at the blackened beams and the piles of ash. Thomas came up behind her and put his hands on her shoulders.
We start tomorrow.
Start what?
Rebuilding. We get lumber. We get help. We put up a new barn. Bigger and better.
That costs money.
I have some saved. And we can ask for help. People around here respect you. They will come.
Ellen turned to face him, and she saw the determination in his eyes, the absolute refusal to give up, and she felt something shift inside her. She realized that she was not alone anymore, that she did not have to carry everything by herself.
You really mean that?
Every word.
Over the next 2 weeks, people came from all over to help rebuild the barn. The ferry workers brought lumber. The ranchers brought tools. Even some of the travelers who had crossed on the ferry came back to lend a hand. Ellen was overwhelmed by the kindness, and she worked alongside them every day, hammering nails and sawing boards until her hands were blistered and her back ached. Thomas was there every moment, working harder than anyone, and at night they would sit on the porch and talk about the future. One night, Ellen brought up the subject that had been on her mind for days.
People are talking about us.
Let them talk.
They think we are together.
We are together.
You know what I mean. They think we are married or about to be.
Are we?
Ellen looked at him, and her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it.
Are we what?
About to be married.
Ellen stared at him, and for a moment she could not breathe. Then she nodded, slow and certain.
Yes.
Good. When?
Soon.
How soon?
As soon as we finish the barn.
Then we better work fast.
They both laughed, and Thomas leaned over and kissed her, and Ellen kissed him back with everything she had. The barn went up faster than Ellen had thought possible, and by the end of the 3rd week it was finished. It was bigger than the old one, with a loft and extra stalls, and it smelled like fresh-cut pine and new beginnings. On the night they finished, everyone gathered for a celebration, and there was food and music and dancing. Ellen danced with Thomas under the stars, and she felt happier than she had in years. The next morning, Ellen woke early and went out to the porch. Thomas was already up, sitting on the steps with a cup of coffee. She sat down beside him, and they watched the sun rise over the bayou.
We should set a date.
For the wedding?
Yes.
What about tomorrow?
Ellen laughed, thinking he was joking. But when she looked at his face, she saw he was serious.
Tomorrow?
Why wait? We have everything we need. A preacher, a place, people who care about us. What else is there?
I do not have a dress.
You look beautiful in anything.
Thomas.
I am serious, Ellen. I do not want to wait. I have spent too much of my life waiting for the right moment, and I am done with that. I want to marry you tomorrow.
Ellen felt tears prick her eyes, and she nodded, unable to speak. Thomas pulled her close, and she buried her face in his shoulder and held on tight. The next day was a whirlwind. Ellen wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had kept in a trunk in the cabin, and Thomas wore his best suit with his deputy badge pinned to his chest. The preacher came at noon, and they stood in front of the new barn with a small group of friends and neighbors gathered around. The ceremony was simple and short, and when the preacher told Thomas he could kiss his bride, he did, and everyone cheered. After the ceremony, There was food and more dancing, and Ellen felt like she was floating. Thomas never left her side, and every time she looked at him, he was smiling. As the sun started to set, people began to leave, offering congratulations and well wishes. Soon, it was just Ellen and Thomas, standing alone in front of the barn as the last of the daylight faded.
How do you feel, Mrs. Harrison?
Like the luckiest woman alive.
Good. Because I feel like the luckiest man.
They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and Ellen felt a peace settle over her that she had not felt in years. The threat was gone. The barn was rebuilt, and she had a partner who loved her and would stand by her no matter what. Inside the cabin, Thomas lit the lantern and turned to face her.
I have something for you.
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Ellen opened it and found a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age.
Where did you get this?
It was my mother's. I have been carrying it around for years, waiting for the right person.
Ellen slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. She looked up at Thomas, and she saw everything she had ever wanted reflected in his eyes.
I love you.
I love you too.
They spent the rest of the evening talking and planning their future. Thomas wanted to expand the ferry business, maybe add a second boat. Ellen wanted to plant a garden and maybe raise some chickens. They talked about children, about growing old together, about building a life that was worth all the pain and struggle it had taken to get there. As the night grew late, they finally fell silent, just sitting together on the bed holding hands. Ellen felt a contentment she had never known, a sense that everything was exactly as it should be.
We did it.
Did what?
We made it through. All the danger, all the threats, all the fear. We made it to the other side.
Together.
Always together.
Ellen leaned her head on his shoulder, and Thomas wrapped his arm around her, and they sat like that for a long time, just breathing and being. Outside, the bayou was quiet, except for the distant call of night birds and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. The ferry rocked gently at its mooring, and the new barn stood strong and solid against the darkening sky. Ellen thought about her father, about how proud he would be to see what she had built, what she had fought for, and won. She thought about the locket and the photograph, about the justice that had finally been served. And she thought about the man beside her, the deputy with something to prove who had given her everything she did not know she needed.
What happens now?
Now we live. We work the ferry. We build our home. We take care of each other. That is all.
That sounds perfect.
It is perfect. You are perfect.
Ellen laughed and swatted his arm, but she was smiling. And when she looked up at him, she saw the same smile reflected back at her. They kissed again, slow and sweet, and Ellen felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had been fighting for. Not just survival, but a life worth living. Not just safety, but love. Not just endurance, but joy. And she had found it all in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely person. A deputy who would not draw his gun unless she was threatened. A man who had proven himself over and over again. A partner who would stand by her through anything. The days that followed were filled with simple pleasures. Ellen and Thomas worked the ferry every day, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and plans. Thomas told her about his childhood, about growing up in a small town with a father who was a lawman and a mother who was a teacher. He told her about the day he decided to become a deputy, about the first time he wore the badge, and how proud and terrified he had been. Ellen told him about her father, about learning to run the ferry, about the loneliness that had settled over her after he died. She told him about the nights she had lain awake, wondering if she would make it, if she was strong enough to survive on her own.
You were always strong enough.
I did not feel strong.
Strength is not about how you feel. It is about what you do. And you did everything. You kept the ferry running. You stood up to Victor. You fought for what was yours. That is strength.
Ellen felt her eyes fill with tears, and she leaned into Thomas, grateful beyond words. One afternoon, a stranger arrived at the ferry, a man in a fine suit with a leather satchel. He introduced himself as a lawyer from New Orleans and said he had been sent to find Ellen Donovan. Ellen's heart sank, fearing more trouble, but the lawyer smiled and told her not to worry. He explained that her father had had a life insurance policy that Ellen had not known about, and the payout was waiting for her in a bank account. The amount was substantial, enough to secure the ferry and the ranch for years to come. Ellen was stunned, and when the lawyer left, she turned to Thomas with wide eyes.
Did that just happen?
It did.
We have money. Real money.
Your father took care of you, even after he was gone.
Ellen cried then, tears of grief and gratitude, and Thomas held her until she was calm. That night, they made plans. They would use the money to improve the ferry, to buy more land, to build a life that was secure and stable. Ellen felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a burden she had not realized she was carrying. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly free. The weeks turned into months, and Ellen and Thomas settled into a rhythm. The ferry business thrived, and they hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work. Ellen planted her garden, and by late autumn, it was bursting with vegetables and herbs. Thomas built a chicken coop, and soon they had fresh eggs every morning. Life was good, better than Ellen had ever imagined it could be. But one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ellen felt a familiar unease creep over her. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something felt off. She mentioned it to Thomas, and he immediately went on alert.
What is it?
I do not know. Just a feeling.
Do you want me to look around?
Yes.
Thomas grabbed his rifle and walked the perimeter of the property, checking the barn, the ferry, the trees. He found nothing, but Ellen's unease did not fade. That night, she lay awake, listening to every sound, and when she finally fell asleep, it was restless and filled with bad dreams. The next morning, a rider arrived with news. Victor Thornton had escaped from jail. The Marshal had sent word to warn Ellen and Thomas, saying that Victor had sworn revenge and was likely headed their way. Ellen felt her blood run cold, and Thomas immediately went into action. He sent the young ferry hand into town to get help, and he and Ellen barricaded the cabin. They moved supplies inside, loaded their guns, and prepared for a fight. Victor arrived at dusk. Ellen saw him from the window, riding slowly toward the cabin with a rifle across his lap. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and called out, saying he had come for what was his, that Ellen belonged to him, and always had. Ellen felt a surge of anger so strong it made her hands shake, and she grabbed her rifle and went to the door. Thomas tried to stop her, but she shook him off.
I am not hiding.
Ellen, do not.
He needs to hear this from me.
Ellen stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, and faced Victor. He smiled when he saw her, that same cold smile she remembered, and it made her skin crawl. Victor said she looked beautiful, that he had missed her, that they could start over if she would just come with him. Ellen raised her rifle and aimed it straight at his chest.
You need to leave. Now.
Victor laughed and said she would not shoot him, that she did not have it in her. Ellen's finger tightened on the trigger.
Try me.
Victor's smile faded, and he raised his own rifle. For a moment, everything was still, the world holding its breath. Then Thomas stepped out onto the porch beside Ellen, his gun drawn.
You heard her. Leave.
Victor's eyes flicked to Thomas, and Ellen saw the calculation there, the weighing of odds. Victor was a good shot, but Thomas was faster, and Victor knew it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Victor lowered his rifle and turned his horse. He rode away slowly, looking back over his shoulder, and Ellen knew it was not over. But it was over for today. She lowered her rifle and let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Thomas holstered his gun and put his arm around her, and together they watched Victor disappear into the trees.
He will come back.
I know.
We will be ready.
I know that too.
That night, Ellen and Thomas did not sleep. They kept watch, taking turns at the window, listening for any sound. But Victor did not return. In the morning, the Marshal arrived with a posse, and they tracked Victor into the bayou. They found him 2 days later, cornered in an abandoned trapper's shack. He tried to fight, but the posse overpowered him, and this time he was taken to a prison far away, where he could not escape. The Marshal came to the cabin to tell Ellen and Thomas the news, and Ellen felt a relief so profound it made her knees weak. It was finally over. Victor was gone, and he would not be coming back. That evening, the first snow of winter began to fall. Ellen and Thomas stood at the barn door, watching the flakes drift down. And Ellen felt a sense of completion she had never known. Everything she had fought for, everything she had endured, had led to this moment. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. Thomas pulled her close, and Ellen rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart.
We should set a date.
We are already married.
I mean, for a real celebration. A big party. Invite everyone.
When?
Spring. When the snow melts and the flowers bloom.
That sounds perfect.
They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the snow fall. And as the world turned white around them, Ellen thought about how far she had come, how much she had survived, and how much more she had to look forward to. She had found her partner, her protector, her love, and together they would face whatever came next, hand in hand, heart to heart, forever. She held a rifle on the blacksmith who swore she belonged to him. In 1895, Louisiana, widowed ferry owner Ellen Donovan faces a vengeful blacksmith who will stop at nothing to claim her. When he escapes jail and rides back for revenge, she must stand her ground with only a rifle and the deputy who loves her. A gripping tale of courage, justice, and a love forged in danger. Subscribe for more Wild West romance stories. Wild West romance, historical romance, 1895 Louisiana, ferry owner, deputy romance, blacksmith villain, revenge story, courage and love, western danger, bayou setting, barn fire, escaped prisoner, rifle standoff, justice served, happy ending western, frontier love story, period romance, strong female lead, protective hero, Wild West justice, colorized late 1800s American West photograph. Natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust/scratches, slight vignetting, no text, no watermark. A beautiful auburn-haired woman in her late 20s with green eyes and a pale blue dress stands on a cabin porch at dusk, aiming a rifle directly forward with fierce determination on her face. Tears of anger visible. While a dark-haired deputy in his early 30s with blue eyes, tan cowboy hat, and depute badge stands protectively beside her, with his revolver drawn, his free arm reaching toward her waist in a protective gesture. Both facing the camera with intense expressions as they confront an unseen threat. Background shows the Louisiana bayou at sunset, with a broad-shouldered rider on horseback, visible in the clearing beyond. Foreground the porch railing and their tense stances. Midground the cabin door slightly open behind them. Background bayou trees silhouetted against orange and amber sky with gathering suck. Storm clouds. Photorealistic cinematic style. Shot on cinema camera. Natural golden hour lighting. Shallow depth of field with soft bokeh background. Warm beige and amber color grading. Looks like a film still from a premium Western romance movie. Authentic 1800s period photography aesthetic. Professional portrait photog. RafiQuality.L/Thuline. And tackled him to the ground. They fought hard, rolling in the dirt, and Ellen ran toward them with the rifle raised. But Thomas did not need help. He pinned Victor down and held him there, breathing hard, his face set and calm.
It's over, Victor. You're done.
Victor struggled, cursing and spitting, but Thomas held him firm until Ellen arrived with rope from the barn. Together they tied him up, and Thomas dragged him to the ferry landing and left him there under guard while they fought the barn fire. The barn was half gone by the time they got it under control, but they saved the horses and most of the hay. Ellen stood in the ruins, soot-streaked and exhausted, and Thomas came to stand beside her.
We'll rebuild.
I know.
And this time, he won't come back. I'll make sure of it.
The next morning, the territorial judge finally arrived. He was a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes, and he listened to Ellen's story without interruption. She showed him the evidence she had collected, the receipts and the witness statements, and she told him about the fires and the threats and Victor's obsession. The judge nodded slowly, and then he called for Victor to be brought before him. The trial was short. Victor tried to lie, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the judge sentenced him to 20 years in the territorial prison. Ellen watched as they took him away, and she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for months. That evening, Thomas came to the cabin and found Ellen sitting on the porch, staring out at the bayou. He sat down beside her and took her hand.
You're safe now.
I know. Thank you.
You don't have to thank me.
I do. You could have walked away. You could have let someone else handle it.
I couldn't do that.
Why not?
Because I love you.
Ellen turned to look at him, her eyes wide, and Thomas met her gaze without flinching.
I've loved you since the first day I met you. I just didn't know how to say it.
Thomas.
You don't have to say anything back. I just wanted you to know.
I love you too.
Thomas smiled, and it was the kind of smile that changed everything. He leaned in and kissed her, slow and deep, and Ellen kissed him back with her whole heart. When they pulled apart, she was crying again, but this time they were happy tears.
Marry me.
What?
Marry me. I know it's fast, but I don't care. I want to spend the rest of my life with you.
Yes.
Yes? She and the warned Randant Rekthing, once outers said, they were place at the time. The warned the wind stas but that we year in Luch coims. Or yes, with a lost lots mark Pogan. Yes, the waist bone frest in the teaching nine ties. The head had barred fire. They called it fire. The wind finally was pay for a Christ it's walking.
Yes. I'll marry you.
Thomas laughed and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and Ellen felt like she was floating. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, talking about the future, about the ferry and the cabin and the life they would build together. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ellen and Thomas planned a simple wedding, just the two of them and the judge, and they set the date for the first week of December. Ellen wore her mother's dress, simple and white, and Thomas wore his best suit and his deputy badge. They spoke their vows on the ferry landing at sunset, with the bayou stretching out behind them and the sky turning gold and orange. The judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed Ellen like it was the first and last time, all at once. That night, they stood together in the cabin that was now theirs, both of theirs, and Ellen felt a peace she had never known before. Thomas wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder.
Are you happy?
I'm more than happy. I'm home.
So am I.
They stood like that for a long time, watching the fire crackle in the hearth, listening to the sounds of the bayou outside. Ellen thought about her father, about the ferry he had built and the life he had given her. She thought about Victor and the danger he had brought, and how Thomas had stood between her and that danger without hesitation. She thought about the future, about the mornings they would wake up together, and the evenings they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset. She thought about the children they might have one day, and the stories they would tell them about how their parents met and fell in love. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Thomas turned her around and kissed her again, tender and slow, and Ellen kissed him back with everything she had. Outside, the bayou sang its evening song, and inside, two hearts beat as one. The ferry would keep running, the cabin would keep standing, and Ellen and Thomas would keep loving each other, through every storm and every sunrise, for the rest of their lives.